This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Thanks for joining us today for this edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Today, we're very pleased to welcome on Marty Greenbaum, who we're going to be digging into everything related to franchises and how to invest in different franchising models. So you want to stick around for that. Today on the download, some interesting news out of Washington. Well, interesting, but maybe not surprising. Lo and behold, the government wants to increase the debt limit by $1.5 trillion, which is quite the hike. We've seen debt limit increases of hundreds of billions in the past, but this is probably the most substantial debt limit increase that we have seen in recent times. And it's going to be very interesting to watch and see just how, this additional governmental spending affects everyday life. It's a little bit hard to always kind of correlate to see, what's going to happen with government spending as it relates to different investments in markets. But if the government is ramping up spending, maybe it's a good indication that some things are starting to fare a little bit better. Or maybe not. Maybe more money going out is not a good thing at all. Now, with regard to money coming in, we have news from Tesla that they are reducing the price by almost 29% on some of their models from this point last year, which, might be an indication that they are not selling as many as they hoped. Now, this is going to be something that is going to come out when we have quarterly earnings calls and we have some additional information that comes out. But if they're trying to slash prices, it would indicate that they are not selling at a higher price, and maybe they're not selling nearly enough as well to prop up the electric vehicle manufacturer. So something to wait and see. Now, lastly, big tech. It is hard to be in big tech. It's one of those things where the past 2 years have just been an absolute bloodbath for the tech sector, and really it hasn't stopped. The photo sharing giant Instagram will cut or relocate all of its London staff. They are essentially slashing all of the staffers that they have in London by the tune of almost 10,000 positions that they're looking to get rid of. Now, of course, Instagram being part of Meta, which is the Facebook parent company, it is definitely something that we're going to see a lot of pain in this sector. Now, with the potential for TikTok to be banned in the United States, it might help to prop up some of these rather languishing stocks such as Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, that might actually start to do better if they have less competition. So again, definitely something to watch out for. But this has been it, and this is the download. Today on What is a franchise? I figured since we're going to be interviewing someone specifically about franchising, it might be kind of good to get maybe a textbook answer as to what exactly a franchise is. We've all probably heard the term, and colloquially, that the big golden arches, that is McDonald's, is a franchise. But what exactly is a franchise? A franchise is a type of license that grants a franchisee access to a franchisor's proprietary business knowledge, processes, trademarks, thus allowing them the franchisee to sell a product or service under the franchisor's business name. In exchange for acquiring a franchise, the franchisee usually pays the franchisor an initial startup fee and annual licensing fees. This is a franchise, and this has been the What Is.
So, Marty, thank you very much for being on with us today. I'm excited to talk about everything to do with franchising. It's something that I'm sure that, everyone's heard, oh, that's a McDonald's franchise, or, oh, hey, there's a Chick-fil-A, or, there's a gym franchise down the road for me. And I kind of grew up in, a franchising business world. So I have a little bit more understanding, but certainly not nearly as much as you probably do. So I'd really like to, have an interesting dive on, kind of the basics of, starting with what is a franchise? What does that mean? And then getting into how this can be an actual investment vehicle for people to either supplant income, to, change the trajectory of where they're deriving most of their income from, and all sorts of things that go into that, being a good fit, how these things fare in recessions, how do you finance the startup costs? Because, these things vary widely in price point as well. So again, thank you very much for being on with us today, and give us a little bit of background about yourself, and let's dive right into it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. Just a little bit about me. I'm 59 years old. I've been in franchising most of my life. My family started a franchise called PostNet. They're like UPS stores. My brother Steve was on Undercover Boss. We opened up hundreds of them globally, and I eventually left that business and owned a marketing agency. So I owned a marketing agency for years in franchising. I'm a certified franchise executive through the International Franchise Association, but I was involved and really entrenched in the franchising industry at every major event and show. I had over 120 clients as franchisors like Ben and Jerry's and Smoothie King and Hertz Rent-A-Car, Remax, Fast Signs. So most of my career, I've been helping franchise companies grow and position themselves to actually attract franchisees. 5 years ago, I became a franchise consultant. Now what I do is I educate people on franchising and I help them find franchises that could be a good fit for them. Love what I do. And so that's my background, and I'm definitely happy to share any of my knowledge of franchising, which is pretty deep, with you and your fantastic audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely something that, I don't hear a whole lot about. In my professional career, I, run across this from time to time with how clients invest in certain types of these, and I definitely want to get more involved in other aspects of this as well. So yeah, let's dig into that. So, kind of on a real high level, people I think kind of think they know about franchises, but if someone were to come to you, what is kind of the bullet points of, what people are typically missing when they say, hey, tell me what a franchise is. Why should I be looking at this?
Awesome. So yeah, listen, I talk to so many people every day, and you're right. Everybody, they see McDonald's. If you ask, like you said, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, usually they'll bring up Subway and of course fitness, but it's fuzzy. They know that there's an investment and they're paying royalties and it's a proven system and you have a brand and they're going to get training and support and so on. But past that, they don't know the details. So let me give you kind of a foundational understanding of franchising. Okay. First of all, franchises were born out of entrepreneurs that had great ideas, right? So somebody came up with a business, they were doing fantastic, example. I don't know if you watch Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives with Guy Fieri. So there's a franchise called Day G. Day G is a Korean barbecue franchise. They started it because they got so much fame on drive-ins, diners, and dives. They had so much fame, so they started it. And I'll tell you, at first, think about it. Most franchisors, they're not great as franchisors because they're really good in their core business, but they have to, now grow and almost become a separate company. So there's emerging franchisors, and by the way, Day-G is doing very well. But there's startup franchises, there's emerging, there's evolving, there's legacy brands. So there's this cycle of life in franchising. Here's what you need to know, okay? Number one, 80% of independent businesses fail in the first 5 years. It's hard to start a business. Most people go into it not knowing what they're going into, not having everything nailed down, not knowing how much it's going to cost or how they're going to do marketing or something, right? And that causes failure, right? Now, franchises, they have it figured out. So at the core, okay, think about this. You have a brand that has something special that consumers love. They want to grow this nationally. They develop a franchise model. They build an infrastructure. The goal for a franchisor is to have successful stores. Now, if you're the franchisor and you started a franchise and it's going great, ultimately you want to take that whole franchise system one day and sell it for big money, right? So if you're going to do that, you have to make your franchisees successful. So franchisors look at their model and they distill down success on every level. So is marketing as effective as we can make it? Are the operations the best we could do? What technology do we need to streamline processes to create a better customer experience. Ultimately, franchisors, I don't care whether they're making sandwiches, fixing cars, or helping seniors, okay? Ultimately, they're in the business of royalty generation, okay? So we know in business that recurring revenues is everything, right? So franchisors, for them, this is the perfect recurring revenue model. Typically, a franchisee will pay 6 or 7% of gross sales to the franchisor over a 10-year franchise agreement, okay? So think about it. If they're doing $1 million, it could be $60,000 a year times 10 years, $600,000. That's a lot of money. Multiply that by 500 franchisees, and oh my God, you got a business that's amazing. And then a lot of private equity companies are driving, are paying multiples, high multiples. But getting to you in our audience, why is that all important? It's important because you have all these resources focused on your success. So you're not in it alone. You've got, plus in addition, you have other franchisees that you could become friends with and learn best practices. So I know that was a big answer for a simple question, but I hope that was helpful.
No, yeah, I think it definitely kind of illustrates the taking kind of some of the guesswork out of it, because starting a business, is tough. Like you said, almost 80% of them fail, and having something where you can be in business for yourself and be mostly your own boss. I mean, you're going to be beholden to franchise agreements and certain things. You're not going to be able to, buy a McDonald's franchise and say, I want to make the Golden Arches blue. But, you do have that level of autonomy to where you are now kind of, buying into a proven system as opposed to kind of throwing something at a wall and seeing what sticks. Now, from the perspective of you saying that, there's the royalty that you have to pay, which I think is relatively easy to understand. You have this, you have to pay a VIG for having the licensing agreements and everything. But as far as upfront costs too, it's easy to say, okay, I'm paying money out of revenues I'm making. That's, a lot easier of a pill to swallow than saying, hey, I have to have X amount of capital. And I don't know, I've heard tangentially that McDonald's is like $1 million or whatever for a franchise. I'm sure they vary all across the board, but, let's kind of talk about, we've kind of touched on the inherent, initial benefits. Now, what are some of the capital outlays that people have to look at when they do these kind of things? So I'm sure it varies widely. And do they all kind of follow the same model? Are you buying into a franchise and it's just royalty? Is it something where you just buy the name, you have to build the building? I'm sure there's a big spectrum on that whole array. So how does that look? And are they all different, or do they have some commonalities? Let's touch on that.
Okay, so first of all, most of them, you don't buy a building. You're not having to build a building. All right. It's rare that you would have to. McDonald's and some of these bigger restaurant brands, yes. But think about it. There's just so many different categories of franchising, everything from fitness to senior care to automotive to IT tech, a lot of home services. I want to break down this conversation into two major categories. Let's talk about, there's retail franchises, and that means that somebody's going to come to you for a service. They're coming to you. You have a retail location, right? And then there's service franchises where you're taking the service to them. Now, it could be at their home, business to consumer franchises, could be at their business to business franchises, right? So if you had to build out a store in a retail franchise, you're going to have a bigger investment because you're going to have to build out to the franchisor's specifications. The average retail franchise, it could be a hair, some type of hair salon to nails to fitness to, just about anything that's retail, is going to be much more. But typically they run $300,000 to $600,000 a retail franchise, and a good portion of that is build-out costs. Now, here's the thing that you have to understand also about costs, and then I'm going to talk about service. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, requires every franchise to have a franchise disclosure document. Okay, there's an item 7 breakdown of all costs. So before you buy into a franchise, you're going to see the breakdown line item by line item, high and low, of what you're expected to invest, where your investment's going. Now, one of the things that's unique about that is this. You have an initial franchise fee, typically $40,000, $50,000 nowadays, all right? but every other line item is almost pretty much what you would have as an expense if you were to open up the same business as an independent. Okay, but they're just making sure you got all the expenses covered. So before you go into any franchise, you're going to have a complete breakdown of those costs, line item by line item. You'll know what you're getting into. All right. So going back to now retail versus service franchises, as I mentioned, typically you're going to someone and providing a service. Maybe you have some vans that you have to buy, right? Many of these are home-based. Some of them you may need a small industrial unit with a roll-up gate, or maybe you don't. All right, there's everything from lawn care to roofing companies to drain cleaning to, I mean, it's everything, painting and so on, right? So there's so many of these different services, but in a service franchise, the costs are usually $100,000 to $200,000. And you scale that as you grow. So the more accounts you get, you add on a van and a couple guys, right? So here's the one thing you do have to know. Just because you spent more on a service, on a retail franchise over a service, does it mean you're going to make more in revenues? No. Okay. Because there are service franchises out there doing $4, $5, $10 million a year in revenues. And this was started on $100,000 or $150,000, of initial investment. So it's kind of crazy how that works. But guess what? Also in that franchise disclosure document, they share financial performance, and we could talk more about that too.
Sure. So you talk about, there's several different, types of franchises. There's service, there's retail, there's, senior care. There's all these different types of, categories. Now, before we kind of drill into that, let's kind of talk about the franchise agreement, because, obviously there's an upfront cost to getting into it. Again, one of the things I think people are interested in doing this is that, like you said, it gives you the ability to kind of be in business for yourself without having to take, any business is risky, full disclosure, any business is risky, but being able to mitigate that and kind of take some of the guesswork out of your marketing, your exposure, your branding is a huge benefit that I am kind of gathering from this. But what kind of restrictions are put on you? Are these things, do they have a spectrum of restrictions on, what you can and can't do? Back to, my analogy of changing the McDonald's arches to blue. How much leeway do people have? Or are these things, or when you're buying into this, yes, you're in business for yourself, but these things can be very restrictive, kind of touch on that. What's the spectrum of that look like?
Listen, when I think of franchising, I think less of restriction. I think more of opportunity. I think more about benefits. Okay. So do they want you to market a certain way and position the brand a certain way? Yeah. But they've learned from hundreds of franchisees and doing this for some time that they can net higher results by doing it the way they've learned to do it. Okay. So restrictions, yes, there's some restrictions. Obviously, you brought up a good fact, but if somebody owned a painting franchise, could they also decide if they wanted to do cabinets, could they add cabinets or cabinet painting to the franchise? No, they would have to get that approved from corporate. And the reason why they may say no is because they've realized that if we do this model and we look at our throughput, and just focus on what we're great at, we're going to do much better than getting involved in this, and this areas. In these areas. So
it makes sense.
The fact is, Now, in regards to brand standards for advertising, you got to maintain them. In regards to what a store is going to look like, definitely. In regards to hours of operations, of course, they're going to want to, maintain a certain level of hours of operation. Keep in mind this. Let's say I'm the franchisor and I'm awarding you a territory. All right. So you're representing the brand in that territory. You're our representative. All right. You're agreeing to represent the brand in a certain way, maintain certain hours, and really deliver on a certain customer experience. Okay. And they want to maintain that consistency. If you walked into McDonald's and you found out that they had egg rolls, it may be odd for you, and it's going to change your perception of what you can expect from them. Right.
Yeah.
So restrictions, usually most people aren't, at first you worry about that, but once you take a deeper dive, you come to learn that, these things are the way they are because it enables you to make more money.
Yeah, restrictions for a reason. They're in place for that. But let's say from the and that all kind of makes sense. And kind of, you saying that kind of, I do agree with you. Yes, that it's, they're there for a reason because they're not doing it to try to, keep you from being successful. They're to make you more successful in what you're doing. But to a different avenue, is there any type of restriction on, let's say, other business activities that you might have? That example of a painter, a painting company, could they also have a business, or are there like kind of non-compete or like conflicting interest things?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I've helped a lot of people into a brand called TeamLogic IT. Okay, great IT company. What do they do? They provide outsourced IT to small to medium-sized businesses. So 85% of small to medium-sized businesses, they don't find it necessary to have an IT guy on staff. They hire a company, usually freelancers, but in this case, TeamLogic being the largest IT service franchise in the US, 200 locations. If I had a 5-office radiology group, I would want, instead of having one guy working out of his house, I'd probably want to go to a TeamLogic, right? So in speaking with many people that had interest in that, some of these people already had IT businesses and they wanted to, maybe they were selling hardware, maybe they were doing something else. I mean, it's a broad category. And I would say to them, listen, you can't have any conflict with TeamLogic because I know you've been doing this IT stuff for 15 years, but the problem is this: how are you going to separate what's their revenues and what's your revenues? Because if you've been doing this 15 years, do you want to give up 7% of your sales that you've built up over 7 years, or 15 years, 7% of your sales to TeamLogic? Because that's pretty much what you're going to have to do. Yeah. So that's an interesting scenario. But other things like many of these franchises are semi-absentee, okay? So could I've talked to all kinds of professionals that will open up something that doesn't quite compete. But if it directly competes, what franchisors are concerned about are a couple of things. A, can you really provide the time and effort it takes to make this successful? Because they're awarding you a territory. They have certain expectations about the performance of that territory. If you're not able to live up to those expectations because you're not focused on it, because you have other business interests, that could be a challenge, right? But most of the time, that's not an issue, right? Somebody gets and finds a fitness franchise, they keep their job, they hire a general manager. So there's in franchising, there is owner-operator franchises, there's semi-absentee franchises where you keep your job, and many people are working from home, so they have some flexibility to start a franchise, and get management in place. And then there's even investor models. There's an investor model franchises where they require 2 hours a month. That's all you got to do. You're the CEO. You go over everything. It's your franchise. 2 hours a month. They bring in a management team for you. You pay an extra fee for that.
Okay, great. And I'm sure I'm sure there's some people that love the model so much that, you can there's probably not a whole lot of restrictions. Again, so long as it's not like a competing business where people just like franchises. Hey, you know what? I really, we don't have oil changes in my place. Jiffy, I don't know if Jiffy Lube's a franchise, but, I'm going to put a Jiffy Lube in, or, hey, like, you know what, there's only a Wendy's. I'd like the McDonald's would do pretty well. I'm sure people kind of get into that. There isn't too much of an issue with owning multiple franchises if you like the business model, right?
Right. No, it's not usually an issue. I'll tell you, most of the people I work with, they're people in corporate America that are tired of, having to punch the clock, have to answer to somebody, having to deal with what they got to deal with nowadays, the unsurety, right? They want to kind of break away, and they're capped out, and they see other people getting into these franchises and all of a sudden starting with one and having 5 or 10 of them. I mean, most of the people never were in another business, before. Okay. And the funny thing about franchising is this, and I think I mentioned this, 70% of the people that go into franchising never had experience in that type of franchise or industry before they went into it. Okay. So.
No, but that kind of leads into the point that you made of, you don't necessarily have to, because these businesses are here to look to have people to expand, and they want to give you all the tools to do so. So, if you've never changed so much as your oil in your truck, and you see a need for it, owning a oil change franchise, you can still be successful with it because of those tools that are put in place. For people to kind of identify needs and then expand their business model to other places. So a few things that I've kind of jotted down a few notes here, and I do have a few other points I want to get to, but when it comes to, you mentioned performance, are there kind of minimum performance standards that someone has to meet, or is it just, so long as you're okay with what you're paying and it's still profitable, or X, Y, and Z, or is that kind of on a spectrum of saying, hey, this has to do so much revenue for this to continue the franchise agreement, unless it gets revoked? Can you speak a little bit to that, of what that looks like?
Listen, at some point, if they're not making money and they're losing money, the franchisors, they want these people to succeed. Early on, if it's not heading in the right direction, they're going to be making sure that the corporate team is working with the franchise to identify the gaps. Here's what's unique about franchising, okay? I owned my own marketing company for years. And I didn't have a lot of marketing companies that I could say, oh, my labor cost was X. Here's what my marketing, expenses were, like the KPIs of a business. But when you're in a franchise, you have that data. So if you're not performing, first of all, you could identify the gaps pretty easily, right? The other part is you have to say, okay, once I've identified, is it marketing? Is it sales? It depends on what type of franchise it is. So, their franchisor will put a team on helping that franchisee, and there's a lot of resources that go to that. But let's say a lot of times what happens is family stuff somebody gets sick, right? Or something happens in their lives, somebody gets a divorce, all of a sudden the business falters. Yeah, many franchises do have minimums, right? But and they could take away your franchise. All right. If someone said, I'm doing bad and I'm not going to try, and here's the thing, keep in mind, think about, let's say if they were complacent on protecting the brand and they operated poorly, think of the other 200, 300, 500 franchisees that could be affected by negative social media, by bad customer experiences. They have an obligation to the whole system, right? To make sure that the customer experience is maintained, that franchisees do well. But yes, if they can't, eventually they're going to do something about it. They're just not going to let it go. But before that gets to that point, they're going to definitely put in a lot of time and resources in helping these franchisees succeed. And these franchisees, they don't have to pay any extra. That's all part of the deal, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, you get that support system built in, which kind of, I think, leads kind of well into my next one about the differences in kind of choosing a franchise. I know there's more reasons why people would choose a particular one, but two things that I kind of wanted to focus on are, obviously in any business segment, and we'll just call this franchising for the sake of argument, is that there's mature brands and there's new ones. Like you mentioned, the Korean barbecue place that was on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. That's a new one. Is there a benefit to going with a new one? Is maybe the franchise fee less? Is the buying cost less? Is the risk versus reward, kind of buying into the ground level and expanding up? What is the benefit or what's the benefit and cost versus going with one versus another? Or is there really one, in your perception of, going with the Korean barbecue startup versus getting a McDonald's?
Well, listen, first of all, you have with more of a legacy brand, or brands that have over 100 locations, they have a certain infrastructure built up. They have better KPIs. They typically have better resources, so overall, it's kind of a better scenario to go with an established franchisor because there's a lot more benefits for you. And I look at franchising when, if I'm going to pay 7% royalty, and it could be 6, 7, or 8, sometimes a little more, but, I kind of stay away from those that are much more than that. I would, the lower always the better. All right. But, I look at franchising and say, like I said, what's the value that I'm getting? And the established brands, they have more value. But why would I go for a newer, startup brand, right? So there are some franchise startup brands that just have amazing concepts. It's just crazy. Like there's this painting franchise right now for people going into a studio and painting, and it's so unique. And like, if you don't get the territory, it's going to be taken. And the model is simple. The profitability is there. It's just like, so sometimes, if you look at an established brand and if I want to open up an established brand in Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, Tampa, yeah, I may not be able to find the territory. It's taken, right? So sometimes we look at these emerging brands and we say, you know what? Do they have a great concept? Do they have a great vision? Are they building the infrastructure? Yes, it may not be as great as an established legacy brand, but if you could see that they have a clear path and they've already had some wins under their belt, and you do the right validation when you're speaking to their existing franchisees and going through your due diligence, you go into it with a little more a degree of risk, but sometimes it'll be worthwhile because it could be something that, you're bringing it to a community. Like, you take Orange Theory, right? Mm-hmm. There's like 1,000 of them out there. They grew really fast. If you didn't get an Orange Theory early on, forget it. You wouldn't be able to get the territory. It's taken, right? And so there's a lot of those stories where I've seen franchises go from 0 to 500 in 2 years. I mean, It's crazy. Yes, I've seen it. This painting franchise, so far in like a year and a half, 150 units. It's crazy. All right. So, and they're going to continue that on. I think they're going to, so again, it's one of those things that becomes like, so here's the problem. Most people that are going into this for the first time, they have no clue how to judge this stuff, right? That's where I come in, and that's where I help them, right? It's what's going to be a good fit for you based on, where you're at in your life, how much is comfortable to invest. All right. What skills and abilities you have, what goals you have, what's going to be right for the market. So there's a lot of what I call criteria that goes in to saying, okay, what's going to be a good fit for me? And it doesn't mean like, hey, I need experience in that. But if you have, good communication skills, you manage people, maybe you have some marketing or sales. I mean, so there's a lot that goes into this. But like I said, sometimes these newer brands are worth jumping on if but not everyone. You got to be very careful.
Yeah, so there's a few benefits. So there's an additional question I have. So the benefit of one, if you are interested in franchising as a concept, it allows you to get into other markets that are otherwise saturated. I live in St. Pete, Florida. I'm getting a McDonald's here would probably be impossible. It's one of the highest population density counties in the state of Florida. It's developed. So, you're not going to do that. You're not getting a Wendy's. You're not getting, there's also, you mentioned Orange Theory. There's 4 of those places. Right near me. It gives me a headache every time I walk by. I don't know how people work out in those places, but it's they're here. So you have the benefit of being able to utilize the franchise concept in a new area that otherwise you might not be able to get that early entry into a market. But is there any other type of like general, is there maybe is there maybe a monetary aspect to that of starting with the new one? Is maybe the franchise, like the part of the gross revenue or gross profits, is that maybe a little bit less to entice more people to drive business? Is it all generally kind of the same? Like you said, 6%, Obviously the price, the franchising fee is going to be less because it's not a legacy brand. So that is probably going to be a smaller barrier to entry. But besides the benefits that you mentioned, are there any other things that people would look at for the startup versus the legacy?
Well, listen, so first of all, I would say franchise fees aren't going to be much different, the initial franchise fee, but that's not the big fee anyways. The big fee is the royalty. So, sometimes these younger brands are like a point less. By the way, a point less could be, 5 to 10 grand a year times 10 years. So, hey, I'd rather have that $100,000 in my bank account, right? The other thing is that there's a fee called the National Brand Fund. Okay, so typically when you get into a franchise, in addition to paying the royalty, you may have a 1% to 2% national brand fund. Okay, rarely have I seen 3%. But what franchisees do, and you probably could understand that in the McDonald's analogy, they do commercials, they build all kinds of websites, they have marketing teams and everything. Somebody's got to pay for that. So they have a fee that all franchisees pay into. On more mature brands, they actually create a committee of franchisees, franchise owners that help decide on how those dollars are spent. On an emerging brand, there's not enough money usually if they have 10 or 20 franchisees to do anything big with it, right? But in McDonald's case, it becomes, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So the fact is on an emerging brand, typically that's usually only 1% instead of 2%. So there's some savings there. So lower fees, number one. The other thing that I sometimes find in regards to newer franchisees is the amount of territory they give. Usually a newer franchise company is going to give a little more territory. They're going to make it more enticing by giving you a bigger territory. So if you had a service company, what would you rather have? 100,000 households or 200,000 households?
Yeah.
Right. So, but that one that's 20 years, legacy brand may only give you 100,000 households.
Those are definitely some great points that you bring up with, regard to, is it going to be a little bit less, maybe, possibly, but it's all relatively uniform on that front. Again, I think the bigger opportunity is obviously the growth, but inherently, risk versus reward, there's a bigger upside for that. But the risk is that, maybe everyone decides that they don't want to paint, after that, and I think America's pretty well established that they're going to eat McDonald's cheeseburgers until, the sun expands and swallows us. I think that's, kind of established, but, to maybe segue a little bit with that risk aspect, everyone looks at the economy, and to do something like a franchise, it's not an inexpensive endeavor. There is significant capital outlay that you have to be okay with. And the risk of that, faltering, just like you said, with any business, granted, the risk is significantly less with the business inherently failing. You have all that support with franchising. But talking about, the economy, it's something I look at every day in my job. Being in finance, I'm looking at, everything with regards to all aspects of finance, and it's concerning to a lot of people. So is franchising something that has, again, a bit of a buffer, I'd imagine, with the additional business support, but what other kind of risk, concern, or maybe benefits do franchising opportunities have when you have market fluctuations, down economies, recessions? Let's speak a little bit to that.
Okay. Well, I get a lot of that from my clients every day. Everybody's concerned about where the economy is going and should they invest or not, right? First of all, as we know, if we invest in the market, the returns are questionable. My 401k went down considerably last year, right? So, real estate, I work with mortgage guys. They've been telling me it's like one of the worst times ever, almost as bad as 2008, right? So I think a lot of people are looking at this, they're scared, and they're like, how do we get ahead? Especially guys like my age that are looking towards retirement and saying, you know what, is there a way where I could actually save money and hit those goals, right? So you got this recession. Now, think about this. If the economy gets worse, are you not going to do an oil change on your car? If the economy gets worse, are you not going to allow someone to come in and check on grandma to make sure she's eating and taking her vitamins and she's got the care she needs? Right? If the economy gets worse and you have a plumbing problem in your house, are you not going to call a service technician? Are you going to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and try to figure it out? I doubt it. Most people
for sure.
can't. All right. So yeah, listen, there are some franchise categories that I would, be concerned about, but there's a lot of them that are what I'm going to call recession resistant. Okay. And that's what a lot of people are interested right now in, right? And I'll tell you, this issue with where we're at in the housing market, right? And with the interest rates and so on, more and more people are actually taking their homes and fixing them up now and doing what they can. So things like painting franchises and flooring franchises, all kinds of different service franchises, they're doing okay. And and when you get down to it, certain repair franchises, they're definitely going to do okay. And guess what? HVAC companies, franchises, and things like home insulation, we're concerned about energy consumption, right? Mm-hmm. So home insulation franchise could be a great franchise to get into about now because, prices are rising and people are looking for ways to save on their energy bills, right? And I even have an investor model version of that where you don't even have to work in the business or know anything about, insulation to get involved in that. So, I look at that and say, yes, definitely there's some concern over it. There are certain franchises that would probably be hit first, but I don't know if like a lady who gets her lashes done religiously every 2 weeks is going to stop. She'll find a way to pay that money because, or people that need a haircut are not, pandemic kept us from haircuts. Pretty much nothing else is gonna. All right. So, so I hope that gave you some clarity on that.
No, absolutely. Or unless your stylist up and quits and you don't want to have anyone else cut your hair, which is my issue right now. I am very nervous about my haircut tomorrow because the same woman's cut my hair for 8 years and but yeah,
well, listen, I don't have to worry about that.
It's the minute I think in maybe another 10 years, I'll be right there. The minute my family, it goes away when you hit, 40, 45. So it is what it is. Can't do anything about it. So, that's all, I really like the picture you painted of, what can be riskier, what the benefits are of some of the, what the benefits are in doing this, in that you get some insulation, where some of the risks lie and everything. And before we kind of get into just another question I popped in my head, before we get into maybe some of the, trajectory of actually doing this and how that actually works for clients that want to invest into franchising, not to the failure point, but what happens if a company says, we no longer want to do a franchise model? What happens in a scenario like that where, you have an operating business, you have branding, what happens in those cases?
Are you saying that franchisors quit?
No, like let's say the company no longer wants to run a franchise model. Like if the company that issued the franchise terminates the franchise agreement, and just no longer.
I haven't seen that happen. What they do typically is they sell the franchise to private equity. All right. So if an owner that was franchising doesn't want to now, what I see is the other thing happening, like the vitamin shop. I don't know. They have 200-300 locations. They decided to franchise, or maybe even 800 locations. I can't recall, but I know it's a huge number. So you see sometimes these businesses that are successful, that are national companies that have gotten to some degree of success, deciding we're going to take this and franchise it now. That's interesting, But like companies like Pet Supplies Plus, they have a lot of corporate stores. Whenever I see a franchise that has a lot of corporate stores, I'm like, wow, this must be pretty profitable if they have that many, corporate stores. So I see that going on. If somebody wants to get out of I really haven't seen that. they typically will sell the franchise as a big asset and cash out and go, live on an island somewhere.
Gotcha. So now let's talk about kind of from the perspective of someone saying, you know what, I want to do this. What are some of the kind of steps that, besides, again, identifying one, that you want to do this, two, what you kind of want to do, realistically, what are kind of the steps in the process? What do people look for in saying, okay, here's the general things that I can expect. If you're buying a piece of real estate, there's a contract, settlement statement, deed, insurance. What are some of the kind of things, not just paperwork wise, but what are some of the things that people can expect when they first start to engage? Do you have to do like market research, or do you just need to have the willingness to do this and the money, of course, to begin into that? So let's kind of start from the beginning and maybe walk us through how starting a franchise works.
Okay. Well, buying a franchise.
Yeah, buying a franchise. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, listen, my role when I work with hundreds of people doing this is to get them through that process. All right. And what I typically do is I educate people and I serve them as a matchmaker. But let's say we got to the point where, okay, we've identified some brands. Okay. And now what happens next? Okay. So first of all, people go online, they look, they see all these franchises. Maybe they drove by something that they're always busy. Maybe I should look into that. People come across franchises in many different ways. A friend will tell them, this one, so-and-so had this type of franchise. They were so successful. Now they own 10 of them, right? So people hear these stories or they come across it. But let's say they get to the point where now they're connected with the franchise company. Now, franchisors all have a process. Keep in mind that franchise companies want to make sure that you're the right fit for them. 30 years ago, if you were breathing and you had the money, they'd make you a franchisee. Now they're looking for certain qualities in you. So there's a process. They have a franchise development or franchise sales process they all have. And it starts with an initial conversation. You probably filling out a form so they understand your qualifications. And really, they're looking for also, do you meet their financial qualifications, right? So let's say you pass that and you had a great initial call. You got a good overview, all right? So there's going to be a series of calls, all right? And in this, you're going to be learning along the way. Now, I always tell my clients, you should be talking to 2 or 3 franchises at a time. Whether you plan on buying this other one or not, you're going to hear something from one franchisor. Maybe they're going to talk about their marketing. And then you're going to be talking to another franchisor about the marketing, and you're going to be asking smarter questions. Okay? Because you're learning, you should talk to several franchisors at one time. The other thing is you're going to go through a process. They're going to tell you about how they make their money, what they call a unit economics call. This is our audience. This is how we operate. This is how we make our money. Here's how our sales mix is broken down. This is how we operate. All right. Definitely have one of those calls. You'll probably have a call about how they get business, right? How do we get business? What is our marketing strategies? Do we have it in-house? Do we have, are we using an agency or so on? Many franchisors, they have an agency, especially digital marketing. The company will do the marketing for all 300 locations at economies of scale where you're saving money and they've proven results and they get you to rank and you're generating leads. If you're a service company, you'll probably want a franchise that has a good call center. So when somebody's looking, and finds you and they reach out, if you don't answer that and you're not there to, to basically either schedule an appointment or provide an estimate, if you don't respond, you'll lose that opportunity. That's why they have call centers and they're really good. So, marketing, you're going to talk about, I mentioned the franchise disclosure document. There's this big document that really required by the Federal Trade Commission that goes over every aspect of the franchise. Inside that document is has, first of all, who are the leadership? What's their experience? What's their background? What's their vision? Does the company have any litigation against them? If you were buying a franchise and you found there was heavy litigation against that franchise, run, okay? Have they had a lot of stores closed or locations closed, and why? Are people retiring or are people failing, right? They have a breakdown of the investment. Item 7 is a breakdown of the investment, a low and high number, so you'll know exactly what you're getting into. Are there any fees that they're going to charge you? What's your responsibilities? What's their responsibilities? All this is broken down in the franchise disclosure document and the agreement. All right. And then you're going to have financial performance. Okay. So what kind of money are these locations making? Now, what's funny about franchises is they have some flexibility on what they report. So you'll find many of the franchises saying or putting in numbers based on their top 50 percentile. Okay. So how do you find out, whether this franchise is a great franchise or not? All right. Well, you're going to look at that information. But more importantly, in this due diligence process, you need to talk to franchisees. Okay. You need to talk to actual franchisees, visit locations, ask the right questions. Okay. And ultimately, they're going to invite you into what they call discovery day, where you're going to meet with leadership and learn more and, see the operation and visit locations and meet all the department heads. And they're, of course, not only are you investigating them, they're making sure you're a good fit. And ultimately, if that goes well, they will award you the franchise or ask, hey, we've decided to award you the franchise. Are you in? Right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how the process goes. But there's a lot of due diligence steps along the way to make sure that you're making the smartest decision possible and you know what you're getting into. Okay.
Sure, absolutely. Now, once you've kind of gone through that, what type of ways do people own these? I mean, is it something that you own in your personal name? Is it something that people buy through LLCs? Are there any type of restrictions or different ways that these things have to be structured in order to do it? Speak to that a little bit.
Well, most people are just going to start an LLC. That's what 95% of the people will start an LLC and have it in the name of the LLC. Some people have partners, and they break up partnership shares, in the LLC. So that's pretty straightforward.
Okay. And as far as like the initial franchising fee, are there any restrictions on how people can come up with that money? Is it something where the franchise agreement stipulates that you can't just go out and borrow money in order to do that? Are there stipulations on what type of borrowing you can be done? Does it have to be personal capital? I know there are options for even using your retirement plan as well. Like I've had experience with using like Rob's plans and stuff. Do any of those kind of play in and have restrictions with certain franchises? Or, when it comes to actually, stroking the check or giving the money out, what type of issues or what type of avenues are available to clients or to people buying franchises?
All right. Well, let me share some information. Every franchise company has a minimum liquidity requirement and a minimum credit score and a minimum net worth. So they're going to initially, you have to satisfy those things to even be considered. All right. And the reason why they have it is, do you have enough money or do you have the ability to get financing? Right. So, so you have to meet those minimum requirements to even be considered to get to step one. Right. Aside from now on, I guess the funding side of it, how you fund that, I don't think it's, it's really what's going to be the best source of funding for you. Okay. So you mentioned, there's SBA, like you're either going to fund it out of money you have or you're going to borrow, right? So if you fund it out of money you have, could you liquidate crypto? Could you sell off some stock you're not, it's not, that may not be in a 401k or something? Could you sell a property to generate cash? There's a number of things that people do to, and get even home equity loans or, right now the SBA is really high rates. There's not many people that are going that route because you're having to spend so much more money on that capital that it's not worth it, worth doing. A lot of people, the majority of people, are actually using their 401k, and you brought up Rob's. So obviously you're a little bit aware of this, that you could use your retirement funds to fund a business, kind of like, you use your retirement funds to fund, to buy stocks. So you could have you could roll over that money into a business and not have the penalties and that typically goes with taking out that money. You're not going to have to pay the taxes on it. You roll it into a business, and now you're controlling, how that performance, what you could do with it. So here's an analogy that could be helpful to the audience. Okay. Let's say I have 400K in my 401K. All right. Just pick that number. And I decide, you know what? Geez, it used to be 525. Now it's 400. And I'm scared it's going to be 300. I worked so long to get it to that. And it's like being eaten away. Now, am I going to make money in the next 12, 24 months? What's the chances of that? And yeah, the cycles change and eventually I'll make money, but there's a lot of uncertainty, all right, right now. All right, so let's talk about what you could do in a franchise. I'm just going to use a scenario, okay? Let's say, I don't know if people know, there's an acai bowl concept, okay? We'll use that scenario. Let's say that the investment's $350,000, but you put in $100,000 of your money, and if most people would finance it, if you're getting an SBA, all right, or if you're taking a 401k rollover, you're going to take all the money. But here's the thing: if you had that money in your 401k, like this franchise, they'll do $900,000 a year in revenue, and let's say it nets 20%. Okay, so you're making, all right, you're making 160 to 180. Okay, let's say you're making 150 to make it easy. Okay, so if you took out 350 and you netted 150 a year, you're doing pretty good on return on investment, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact is, with the right franchise, and if you, like, it used to be where I could say you take 100 of your money and you get an SBA for 250, and you're using 100 of your money and you're able to do that, that scenario is even better. Okay. But if you can't, right now using SBA funds is a little bit, it's a little bit crazy. So nonetheless, either way, you could outperform what you see as returns on a typical portfolio in the stock market. So is there risk? Yes. But can you mitigate risk? Yes, through the right due diligence, to talking to other franchisees. If they have 300 franchisees and they have a specific performance that could be validated, okay, then you could definitely mitigate risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's most of the time when I, talk to people in my professional capacity about Rob's plans, I'm always a little bit leery just because of the huge innate risk of new businesses. But, when people say, hey, I'm doing this for a franchise, again, I can't advise clients on, whether or not that's a better choice for them. Smarter people than me can advise them to that effect. But it definitely makes me a little bit less concerned about people, putting everything into something with an 80% failure rate. It's just, again, it's definitely something, if you're interested in doing one with Rob's plans, I always encourage people, that involves its whole other set of homework to do and those kind of things, because not only are you doing something that has a good degree of complexity, not to mention everything you're doing with the franchise agreement, you're also getting into some restrictive areas of having to have things structured in a certain way. You mentioned that a lot of people like to buy or hold franchise agreements in LLCs. Well, LLC benefits normally allow for pass-through, meaning that, you're not taxed at a corporate rate. You get to pass it through to your personal income. You do have the ability to keep things on the LLC side or pass it through. There's a lot of different ways you can play with that. When you go with the Rob's route, Well, granted, you don't have to pay taxes and penalties and things like that to inject the capital for the franchise agreement, but you have to structure it as shares of a C Corp. So you're automatically electing to be taxed at a corporate rate for some of this stuff, which again, depending on what you're looking to do and the tax savings may or may not be a good fit. But again, I always like to temper people's expectations when we bring that up because it's very enticing. You bring up all these benefits of investing into franchises, which again, I think you've enumerated a lot of really good points. And I hope people really take this to heart, especially if you're entrepreneurial, where you get a lot of the benefits of that without a lot of the risk. But again, just understanding that not everything is, you got to take the rose-colored glasses off sometimes and be very pragmatic.
I will say this. You got to be careful. You have to do the right due diligence. You probably need some help. Like, if you haven't been in the stock market, would you go out and just buy any stocks that, so having a guy that understands franchising and being able to lean on him, to make sure that, you're seeing things clearly and you understand the big picture, you have to get professional help, but you also have to do the right due diligence. So yeah, you can mitigate most of the risk, but you're going to have to put time into that, but it could be worthwhile. So just like anything, you don't jump and do anything, right? Don't make it happen fast. Be careful.
Exactly. And that's why people in the professions like you exist and myself, I encourage people always do due diligence, but talk to some people, just like you said, a big part of doing a franchise is talking to the franchisees. A big part of making decisions on the stuff is talking to people like you. And big part of doing alternative investing is talking to people like me, of getting people that have seen a lot of this stuff to get a second set of eyes, because you can read till you're blue in the face, but until you talk to someone that's actually been there or talk to multiple people that have actually seen it work, again, you want to be, I think, kind of the principle in franchising is that you're trying to get as much help as possible to be as successful as possible. So why wouldn't you front load that, making sure that you're doing all of that, again, I think is a really great service. And again, that's what you do professionally, correct, Marty, is the advisory part. Or again, I have to be very careful how I use advisory. I'll let you kind of give the exact blurb of, exactly your role in that. But also, if people are interested in pursuing this avenue, how can people get in touch with you? Because we kind of need to bring this in for a landing. So, again, just kind of maybe give us a little snippet of exactly professionally, what you do. And if people want to get in touch with you, how they can do so.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So really what I do, I'm called a franchise consultant. But really, I'm a franchise educator and a franchise matchmaker, okay? So I educate people about franchising and how to buy a franchise and what the due diligence looks like. And I help them identify what, franchises could be the best fit for them. Spend tons and tons of time learning about these franchises. And I'll tell you, there's a lot to know. I want people to know that I don't charge them, and I know that sounds odd. How do I make my living? Very similar to a real estate agent. So if you buy a house using an agent, all right, you're going to pay, you don't pay, the buyer doesn't pay the agent fee, the seller does, right? So you don't pay me anything. I never charge you anything. I don't pressure people. I don't have anything to sell, all right? I work with people, I educate them, I give it to them straight. We find some great brands. I turn them over to the franchise companies, and they learn and they decide whether or not this franchise is worthwhile for them. If they decide to move forward with a franchise and pull the trigger and become a franchisee, I receive a referral fee from the franchise company that doesn't affect what my clients pay. So they never pay me anything. And I'll tell you, I've been doing this long enough. I was in business long enough. I take this very seriously. I'm helping people kind of chart this new path for their future, right? And it's very important. They can't afford to make a mistake. So I take this very seriously, and I really want my clients to be a success. I love what I do. But if you want to get in touch with me, first of all, my website is smartfranchiseinvesting.com, smartfranchiseinvesting.com. And my email is marty@smartfranchiseinvesting.com. There's links on my website to schedule a call. So feel free to reach out. I'm here to help and love to have a conversation.
Fantastic, Marty. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope everyone listening or watching really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you for tuning in to The Alternative. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of The Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.